So welcome to the review of week 2 to Can I Learn Japanese with ChatGPT? First off, I would like to start with a little recap of the hiragana we learned this week, as well as the vocabulary. Let's start with the hiragana. So from day 8 to day 14, we learned the M series, the Y series, the R series, the W series, the G series, the D series, and the D series, which would be ma, mi, mu, me, mo, ya, yu, yo, ra, ri, ru, re, ro, wa, wo, en, ga, ki, gu, ge, go, za, ji, zu, ze, zo, da, ji, zu, de, do. Right, and about the vocabulary, as you can see, it's quite a lot, so I don't want to list every single vocab we learned. I did highlight 4 because they are important in order to discuss some problems I had with ChatGPT later on in this video. So remember them, but I will show you them again. So yeah, let's continue. Let's start with issue number 1 I had this week with ChatGPT, and the first issue would have been with the ducten. So when ChatGPT introduced the ducten, it didn't really give an explanation as to what a ducten is. So it only showed a symbol and showed like, hey, a ta, for example, comes a da. So yeah. So about what a ducten is a diacritic sign or symbol. How you can best explain this is essentially that it makes a consonant that's unvoiced, make it sound voiced. To explain this relatively simple, essentially your vocal folds will start moving or vibrating, for lack of a better word, when you voice a consonant. You can very quickly test this, like just slowly say t, t, t in a row while having your hand softly lying on the front of your throat. You will realize your throat isn't really moving, you don't really feel much. Then do the same with the B consonant, the, and suddenly you will feel like that slight vibration. Right, that was the first issue. Now to continue with the next issue. The next issue would have been that ChatGPT often introduced unknown hiragana when showing you vocabulary. To show you an example, this would be tsashi and chisho. These were 2 of the words I previously highlighted in the vocabulary list. So as you can see, the tsu from tsashi and the yo from chisho are slightly smaller. And let's take chisho, for example. When I would pronounce it how I would have learned it at this point, I would have pronounced it chishiyo instead of chisho. So like this smaller hiragana weren't really introduced up to this point, so I shouldn't know them. So ChatGPT essentially introduced vocabulary which I cannot read at this point. I only knew this because, like I said previously, I did know some hiragana and some hiragana rules. So yeah. So let's continue with the next issue. The next issue would have been ji and su and su. As you can see, ji and su can be written with 2 different hiraganas, even though they sound the same. So the letter ji and su, when they were introduced, ChatGPT essentially just said, hey, they aren't used that often anymore, and no further explanation or examples when they are really used. So I researched a bit, and essentially the first ji and su are the more modern version, and like ChatGPT already alluded to, are the more common versions. Like most of the time when you will like write a word in hiragana, it's one of them. So the letter ji and su are mainly used when you have a compound word, or if you have like the ji 2 times in a row, or the tsu 2 times in a row. And let me show you this in an example from the vocabulary we had. This is the word tsusuku, which most of you already know, probably, as it's always at the end of a manga chapter or manga volume. which means to continue or to be continued. And here you can perfectly see the tsuzuku. Now, why it's written like that, I couldn't really find, like, there were a few different sources, but I jokingly tried to say tsuzuku without a ducten, which would be tsutsuku. And if you try this more than once in a row, you will realize that to pronounce tsutsuku is incredibly difficult, because when you want to pronounce the second tsu, you essentially need to reset your entire, like, tongue position, like your entire, like, vocal cords or whatever. Essentially, you just need to reset. It's far easier to say tsuzuku. Yeah. At least this is how I could explain it to myself. And that's, for example, one of the reasons you can find them. So last but not least issue would be dictionary's first choice. So every single time I had a vocabulary and before I put them into my index cards, I always checked if the translation fits what ChatGPT has given me through a dictionary. So in the most times I put in the word into the dictionary, it normally was the first or second choice. Like here, for example, you have dashi from before, or zenbu, another word I learned this week. And as you can see with the single one in front, they were always the first choice of the dictionary. So there's one word this week where this didn't really fit. And that was gaku, which means learning and study. And gaku, when I checked it on the same dictionary, was in 4th position, which was unusual. So I had been wondering why. Why do I suddenly have a vocabulary that's in 4th position, not in the 1st? And then I remembered that previously I had the vocabulary gakusei, which means student. So I don't know if this was just a coincidence or if actually ChatGPT planned this, but gakusei, the word student, that you then have the word gak, which means learning or study, makes sense in that context. But yeah, I was a bit surprised because it's also not the first word I associate with learning or study. Like, there are different words that are more commonly used, but at least I hear more often when I, for example, watch like Japanese media or animes. So, and because I don't like to end things on only the negatives, let's say some positive things to end this all. So some positive things were consistent structure and consistent progression. So ChatGPT didn't suddenly have like a jump in where it becomes incredibly harder. So the progression of difficulty and of learning material was consistent, like it was always around the same amount. It also was a consistent structure. For those who maybe have seen the first week video where I introduced all this, you will have seen that ChatGPT in the beginning didn't really have like the structure I wanted it down. So I told ChatGPT that I first want a review of the previous day, then introduction into whatever I'm learning, then a small reading exercise and writing exercise, and that was a bit of an issue last week, but this time I had no issues at all. So yeah, that actually made me pretty happy. So yeah, and that's it for this week. I thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.